Hi everyone, welcome back to PM School's YouTube channel. I'm Khanjan. I am currently a PM at Razorpay, and I'm delighted to have Shainum, who is a product manager at Bounce. He has very graciously agreed to do a mock interview for us. So we are back again with a mock interview. Hi Shainum, how are you doing?
Hey Khanjan, I'm fine. All good.
Great. Okay, so Shainum, quickly, if you can just introduce yourself in your own words, and then we'll jump into the interview.
Sure. My name is Shainam, and I am currently a product manager at Bounce, right, working on supply products out there. And post this, I worked at Udaan.com as well. And yeah, I did my education from IIT Madras and IIM Bangalore. So yeah,
Great.
very brief intro. Cool.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so Shainam, today the question I have for you is that I've been observing, right, that because of COVID in the post-COVID era, students and both educational institutions and students are facing a big challenge, which is in the examination space, right? So now
Mhm.
educational institutions for them to conduct firstly examinations online is in itself a very big challenge, but to ensure fairness and ensure that students are not cheating is an even bigger challenge. And at the same time, students also have their own set of challenges in terms of having the right infrastructure, in terms of being able to focus in the online mode, right? So these are some of the problems that come in top of my head right now. So as a product manager, you it would be great if you could design a product which could address these problems and ensure that the examinations are fairly taken by the students.
Okay. Cool. Just give me some time. Let me kind of
Sure.
structure my thoughts and think about it. Yeah. Cool. So, just to clarify this a bit more, you're talking about let's say a platform to enable institutions, not necessarily schools or universities, but maybe companies or government institutions as well, to set up and conduct examinations for their students or users, right? And enable the students to also appear for these exams, right? So,
That's correct.
am I getting it right? Okay, cool. So from that point of view, I'd say that there are actually two users here, right? I mean, one is the students,
Yeah.
right, themselves, and second, it would be the the institutions, right? And my assumption would be that they would actually, you would eventually want to make them the paying customers for
Hmm.
this product, right? Okay, so I'll probably start off by thinking about what would be the problems that you're trying to solve,
Okay.
both for the institution and the students.
Sure.
Okay, so let's say if you look at the institutions, right? What do they actually want to do? What are you trying to solve for them, right? They need to be able to, set up the exam online, which means basically like uploading questions, right? Uh, it could be objective questions or subjective questions as well, right? And not just uploading questions, but uh, defining what the marks are for those questions, and then telling inputting what the answers are as well, right?
Yeah.
Setting that entire infrastructure online, right? And second, it's enabling the institutions to grade the questions, right? And thirdly, what I would think is a problem that we're trying to solve is how do we reduce fraud, right?
Hmm.
Especially in online exams, that's a big problem, right? I think a lot of colleges are facing that issue right now, right? How do you identify fraud, and how do you ensure that you identify it correctly, right? Um, so those are the basic three problems I try to look for at least for institutions. Am I going in, should I proceed further? Is that fine with you?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Cool. So from a student standpoint, right, like let's say if I'm actually taking an exam online, right, what matters for me? Clarity, right? Clarity on um, what what the grading for that particular question would be, right? And how I would be graded for that question, right? What are you actually looking for, right? That is one thing. The other thing is, let's say, after the grading has happened, right? What are my grades, and why did I get this specific grades, right? So there are two type of questions, right? One is an objective question like MCQs, integer type answers, which it's pretty straightforward, right? But let's say for subjective questions, right, I need to understand, like, uh, why was I given a 3.5 out of 5 instead of a 4, right? So that clarity is pretty important. um, Then there's the fact that sometimes if I do have my doubts on the questions, I may want to ask for a review, right? That happens a lot in, I mean, I'm taking an example from college as well, right? You
Uh,
have doubts and you go back to the professors and ask them like, I think this
right.
is correct,
Uh,
this is why I think it's correct, right? A reevaluation of sorts, right? And then considering it's online, right? How do you handle internet drop off, right? I
mhm.
mean, uh, that's a pretty important thing, right? Like if you don't handle this edge case, like the whole exam can go for a toss, and that impacts user experience, right? And uh, it's not just for the students, but even the institution will get annoyed as well, right? So
Yeah.
these are the major problems that I try to look at. Like, give me some time just to just like look at what
Sure.
are the possible solutions for this. Okay, so what I would try to do, I'll try to look at all the possible solutions first, and then maybe later on look at how can we actually prioritize this and figure out what to release for, let's say, testing out with beta users or something, right? So when I talk about the problems for institutions, right, in terms of setting up the exam, right, it's basically uploading questions on the platform, right? So two ways to go about it. There are different types of questions which we have to define, right? Either it's an objective MCQ, objective integer type question, or it could be a subjective question as well, right?
Yeah.
So from a user standpoint, I think that I should be able to either upload like individual questions, or let's say I already have a bulk set, right, a set of questions and answers ready. There should be a bulk upload feature available as well, right? And this bulk upload feature can have like different formats for different question types, right? So those could be potential solutions for at least setting up of exams. Now from a grading perspective, right, for objective questions, we can enable auto grading, because this will be easy to do, because when you're actually uploading these questions, you'd already mention that this is the mark for this question, and whenever the user actually inputs the answer, it's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Now of course, sometimes what happens is there could be cases where the teacher or the professor gives a wrong MCQ number as an answer, right? So there should be a capability to allow them to also like edit what is the right answer, and edit the marks for a specific question as well, right? So that's one thing. However, for subjective questions, right, in terms of grading, um, initially maybe what we can do is you actually have like user you ensure that video is on, right, for students when they're actually taking the exam. Of course there are issues with, you'll have to think how do we handle internet bandwidth, right? And secondly, like it's a very manual process, right? Like somebody actually has to look at you through the entire exam, which is a painful process. So that can be improved by, let's say, you use ML to identify possible cheating cases, right? Possible frauds, and you only then have to manually look at just that set of those set of videos, right? So that can actually, let's say, if your ML model is accurate to like a 90% probability, right? Like you only have to look at the 10%, like 10% of cases where you might actually have an error, right? So from that angle, using ML to actually reduce the number of videos you have to manually look at, right? Now, second thing is, from the clarity point of view, right? From that angle, what most important is the UI, right? For as a student, do what are the most important things for me? One is, of course, the question in itself, right? The total marks of that question, right? The time remaining, uh, and 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 it depends on the type of exam you have, right? Let's say it's an exam where I can skip between questions multiple times, right? So
Yeah.
the time remaining in the exam itself, and then there are certain exam types where, let's say, I have a specific time span per question,
Hmm.
so the time remaining for that question as well, right? And of course, like for subjective questions, how would I be grading this? What am I exactly looking at, right? So that should also be there. Review requests, what can be done is, you for every response that you have, right, you can request for a feedback and also give your comments on why you think it's the correct answer, right? And maybe then we can have a resolution from the professor or something like that, and they can also have like a chat one-on-one or something like that, right?
Hmm.
Now in terms of internet drop-offs, what can be done is, there are two ways, right? One is, do we do we pause the exam at that point of time and allow the user to rejoin again, obviously giving like let's say you have only 5 minutes to actually join back,
Yeah.
right? Or do we enable a kind of a checker, like for example, if the user has dropped off, right, they need to call somebody, and only that person can allow the user to get back in, right? It
Okay.
need not be automated as well, right? Now that these are like too many solutions for, let's say, building it on the very first try itself, right?
Yeah.
So how I would go about this is like, probably try to figure out a few institutions, right?
Mm.
Partner with a few institutions only, and try to launch the like a minimum viable product, right? Like, which features have like would have a good impact, but takes lesser effort, right? And maybe what the solutions I've actually mentioned here may not actually even be relevant, right? Once you actually launch the MVP and get the feedback from the users, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, do you want me to like go to the prioritization as well, or?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I'd like to know that, I mean, I did hear you out that you mentioned that your rationale would be high impact, low effort. That's the
Mhm.
rationale you're picking, right? So can you just give a view of what would be there in your MVP, which you would probably do like a POC often in the institutions that you pick?
Yeah. So before we go into that, right, let's look at what out of all these solutions that I've actually mentioned, which are the ones that are like, must are a must for the MVP, right? One,
Okay.
obviously, setting up the exam and uploading questions is pretty important, right? But is a bulk upload feature actually necessary?
Hmm.
Okay. Maybe we can start with just a single question upload, right? So
Yeah.
if you look at both these features, the effort, I'd say, is mostly the same, right? But the impact is pretty high, right? But if I can do with just one feature, just for an MVP, I'd go with the single upload for now, right? And then see if a bulk upload makes sense or not, right?
Okay.
In terms of grading, right? Auto grading is something that we can do for objective questions, right? But in terms of the ML recommendation I talked to you about, right, for subjective questions, that will involve a lot of effort, right?
Yeah.
And also you'll need to gather a lot of data, right, to
Yeah.
actually train this ML algorithm, right? So what I do is I won't deploy that right now, right? Um, I would, however, enable professors or the institutions to look at the videos and actually, ask them to tag cases where they think are cases of fraud, right? And that would actually feed our let's say we're trying to build an ML algorithm in the future. That would be a good source of data, right, to
Yeah.
train the algorithm.
Surely.
So yeah, so in terms of setting up exam, only the single question upload, right? In terms of grading, only the objective,
Yeah.
objective auto grading would be there.
Yeah.
Subjective, I'll leave it out for now because there's too much effort involved, right? And you don't even have enough data, right? And with respect to the review requests, right?
Mm.
Probably right now, since we're testing it out on a few institutions, right? I'd probably try to enable a kind of a manual way to do this for now, right?
Okay.
Um, I know I've mentioned that this will be there, but what we can do is probably enable it in a manual way right now, and actually see how they do it. What are the kind of uh, how does the interaction happen between the student and the professor, right, when they actually ask for a review request, right? And then maybe implement that in the later version. Yeah, so in that sense, I'd only look at these features for now. Okay. Take a few institutions, deploy it over there, get some feedback, and then think about the v1, v2, etc., right? I mean, of course, I do have a kind of a brief, I mean, a kind of a plan for v1, but this can change based on feedback.
Okay.
Right? So,
And so how would you go about the GTM part of it, right? Like how would you select the institutions? How would you maybe do a POC? Because considering that you will need some representatives also from those institutions, and how will you select because okay, one problem that I'd like to ask you about is, which all of us face during our research is uh, getting the customers or getting the beta testers ready and accept the invitation to actually test the product. So how would you go about the entire plan?
yeah. Um, so with regards to GTM, I actually what's more important is actually like like which are the institutions which are still having this thing online right now,
Okay.
right? So when I talk about these exams, right, it's not just about schools, universities. This can be extended to companies as well, right?
Yeah.
Um, but when you look at it, like companies for their recruitment or anything like that may not be comfortable with using a testing out a software for something official, right?
Okay.
And even for institutions where they are actually having their official exams, right? Like let's say a final year exam or something like
Yeah.
that, they may not be comfortable with using this software, right? So what I would do is actually when I go to a few institutions, right, I'd actually look at if they have any daily test or something like that where it's not exactly graded for
Okay.
the students, right? So in that sense, for the institution, there's not much of a risk
Hmm.
because the students are not I mean they do get marks for those papers, but it's not added to their, let's say, yearly whatever yearly rank or something like that,
Got it.
right?
Yeah.
So I'd probably try to find institutions who have like these frequent tests, right?
Hmm.
Some sort of evaluation, and test it out on them first, right? And get feedback from them. So the rationale is that there is no risk for them, right? And they would be using our product, and of course I'll initially give it for free, right? Because the main thing is getting feedback about the product, right? And let's say they actually really like the product, right? And we then they can probably proceed to using it for their yearly evaluation of sorts, right? So
Right.
that's how I would
So,
do it. And yeah, the other thing is obviously I'd look at like institutions in tier one cities first because
okay.
of course I did mention internet drop off is a problem, but
Hmm.
probably I'll pick I'd figure out how to solve that later on, right? Right now I try to figure it out for tier one cities where the internet bandwidth may not be a major issue, right? So
Sure. So, now the POC that you mentioned about taking qualitative feedback, right? So you will basically give your tool and you'll basically ask them if the features were useful or not. Would you also like to parallelly rely on some data about maybe their usage or the kind of interactions they were doing with the UI UX? Would you like to do that, or do you think it's not going to be necessary at the stage that you're in?
at this stage, in terms of the UI, right? That will be important from the student standpoint, right?
Hmm.
Trying to identify, how are they understanding the questions correctly, right?
Right.
Are they like probably getting feedback at the end of the end of the exam, right? How was the experience, and
Yeah.
did you understand all the questions? And not just at the end of the exam, at the end of the grading as well. How did you feel about the grading? Do you feel that it was uh, it was fair, etc., right? And
Yeah.
that's one thing. And the other thing that I mentioned was I told you about the ML model to identify possible fraudsters, right? So
Yeah.
uh, asking the institutions to actually tag these videos, right? That this was a case of fraud, right? That would help us build our ML model in the future. So
Hmm.
these are the probably two data points I would look at right now, right? And figure the rest later on.
Sure. And so when you're giving this out to the institutions, right? There'll also
Yep.
be the students part of cohort
Mhm.
who will also be testing this or who will rather be using this. So, what kind of probably some sample questions that you can think of that you would ask the students to validate whether the features that you picked up are actually going to be useful to both the institutions as well as students?
So that'll depend on the on the type of students, right? Am I targeting like let's say a university student, or am I sampling this out in a school, right? Where it's a
Yeah.
fifth standard student or something like that, right? So depending on that type, that's how the question will be different. But
Hmm.
of course I'd like to test out different type of questions, like different question types, like an MCQ, an integer type question, and try to see if they I can actually see all the options properly. Are they answering correctly? Do they understand the question, right? And let's say for a subjective question as well, does it are there any issues with them typing it out of there in terms of the font and all that? So mostly testing each question type, right? The ones I mentioned may not be all. There would obviously be more types of questions, right? And then the exact question would depend on what are the students like. What is my target student, right? Is it a fifth standard or is it a university student?
Sure.
So cool. So like you mentioned, right? The problem was everyone's trying to go online in terms of education in the education sector, right? And taking an examination and grading it in a fair manner has been a big problem, right? So how do we actually build a tool or a platform where institutions can conduct exams and grade it in a fair way, and also students can attend these exams, and they should understand, they should feel that everything is very clear and it's fair for them, right?
Yeah.
So from that sense, like there are two users, right? The students and the institutions, right? And in terms of the problems that exist for an institution, it's setting up the exam online, right? Grading and fraud detection, right?
Yeah.
And for students, it's clarity on the UI and everything, on the time, the marks, the grading pattern, clarity on how I was actually graded after the exam, right? Third is ability to get reevaluated for the paper, right? And finally, like how do we handle internet drop-off, right? And in terms of the solutions for these problems, right? I mentioned that in terms of setting up the exam, right? How do we upload individual questions? How do we upload the bulk questions, along with uploading the answers for those questions as well, right? And
Yeah.
then second thing is with respect to grading, right? How so there are these objective questions and subjective questions, right? So um, in terms of objective questions, auto grading is something that we can do, right? Subjective questions, it's a bit more difficult. It'll have to be manual, right? But later on, probably we can use some text recognition to actually, work on that. And in terms of fraud prevention, right? Um, Initially, probably you'd have like people actually looking at the videos and trying to identify fraud. But eventually, what can happen is you have some ML algorithm which can give you a probability of fraud, right? So let's say if that algorithm says that this video has a high probability of fraud, then the institutions can only look at those videos and try to judge that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I've mentioned that with respect to internet dropouts, we'll look at that later, right? And in terms of prioritization, I looked at effort and impact, right? And also what are the minimum number of features that I actually need to test out my product with a given set of users, right? And probably get feedback from them to see if my plan for the future versions does it make sense or not, right? And yeah, the features that I mentioned in the at least in the MVP is enabling a single question upload, right? Auto grading for objective questions, and yeah, with respect to review requests, right? I probably do that manually. I won't build a feature for that, and also enabling institutions to mark cases where they think there was a fraud, so that will help me train my ML algorithm in the future. Yeah. So
Okay. Thank you so much for summarizing that. And that brings us to the end of this mock interview. Thank you so much, Shainam,
sure, sure.
for doing this. If any of you has any questions on this particular case or any other question, then you can comment below on this video. I'll also link Shainam's and my coordinates in the video description, so you can reach out to us. And please subscribe to this channel because we'll be coming with a lot many more such videos and a lot many more product managers like Shainam to help you all get some perspective on how the interviews go like.